Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. President Muhammadu Buhari has criticized state governors over what he described as the unfair treatment of his regime at the grassroots. The president was speaking at a parley with members of the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies when he stated that the stunted development experienced at the local government level is caused by governors and local government officials who pocket public funds. Apart from corruption, one of the problems facing Nigeria is the mismanagement of resources, which is what has thrown the country into the current state of economic crisis. It is believed that the state of the Nigerian economy can begin to have a reformation. A very responsible and progressive-minded president with a development strategy is elected in the 2023 election. However, despite the internal wrangling that is rocking the main opposition party, the People's Democratic Party, the PDP, former Senate President Olusegun Saraki has said that the resolution of the crisis will surprise Nigerians. The former president of the Senate says members of the PDP will work together for the victory of Atiku Abubakar in the 2023 presidential election. Joining us now to discuss the state of the nation and Nigerian politics ahead of the 2023 election in Nigeria is Mohammed Hayatu-Deen, a PDP chieftain, chairman of Renaissance Development Forum, and chairman, CEO of Alpine Investment Services, a member of the Alpine Group of Companies. Welcome to the morning show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you, Ayo, and thank you, Rufai.
Good morning. Thanks for coming.
Now, so many issues on the table. On this table here, we've been discussing poverty, multidimensional poverty index, saying 63% of Nigerians, amounting to 133 million out of a little over 200 million people are in poverty. Inflation has risen to 21.09. Unemployment rate is over 23%. The cost of borrowing has gone through the roof. This is Christmas. Many families will not be able to eat rice because a bag of rice now has become very expensive. And we have, the various political parties going around making promises to the people. In your opinion, what are those fundamental issues that Nigeria must address and that must constitute policy priorities for those looking toward 2023 general elections?
Thank you for that question. I think it goes without saying that the number of issues that you had elucidated are very true, and it's even much more than that. But sometimes we tend to miss the wood for the trees, in the sense that I think you need to begin by looking at certain philosophical axioms, because we must not mix, causes for symptoms. Many of the issues that you actually highlighted are symptoms of deep underlying problems. First and foremost, I think we do not have a very effective governance philosophy in terms of deciding where do we want to actually take this country from an economic, social, and development perspective. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is the need for us to forge an elite consensus. Any number of people that you speak to within the elite, if you put 10 people in a room, you are likely to have probably 20 different sets of answers. And it therefore behooves us as a country for the elite to actually look at the interests of the nation first, put our own selfish interests at the back burner, and really do those things that great nations do in order to serve their country to the best of their ability by focusing on fundamental long-term development objectives. Number three, related to that, is shared values. It is very important that we actually restore the discipline, the decency, the hard work, the industry, the honesty, accountability, and transparency back into our lives in this country, because I believe that over the last 30 years, this is actually what has more or less decimated this country. And I think, still speaking about philosophy, it's very important for us to agree on a macroeconomic philosophy for this country. What I have seen, particularly over the last 10 to 11 years, is that we have founded tremendously in formulating a very robust macroeconomic philosophy that seeks to provide a conducive environment that guarantees a very stable macroeconomic environment that is able to create jobs, output, savings, and investment. And macroeconomic philosophy is actually driven by two engines. One is fiscal policy, and the other is monetary policy. We're all witnesses to the fact that these twin engines are not working in sync. Both sets of policies are actually designed to ensure that we're able to generate sustained economic growth, but they do not seem to work in a manner in which they seem to synchronize and complement each other. I think there are a host of other issues, philosophical in nature, that are important. Our attitude to infrastructure development needs wholesale change by ensuring that we're able to collaborate with the private sector to build together a consortium of private sector investors, both within and outside the country, who are then in a position to actually fund infrastructure development. And what we are talking about here are not pennies or boxes of chocolate, but we're talking of big numbers. We need at least an investment of $35 billion per annum over the next 5 to 10 years in order to raise our total stock of infrastructure assets as a ratio of GDP to about 70-75%. Beyond that, I think we also need to implement a host of other measures. Dealing with corruption is very, very important. Dealing with the size of government is important. Dealing with restructuring the country is important. All of these matters, all of these are big ticket items. And without actually getting them right, you cannot actually make sustainable long-term progress, in my view. So anybody who is coming into office in 2023 needs to have that kind of grand vision and to build an alliance around these issues so that once there is agreement, we can then move forward. But I dare say also, Ruben, that it is critical that we address this issue of national unity. The nation is deeply wounded and divided. I think all 220 million Nigerians need to have a fair shake, need to be fully represented in all of the institutions of government, in the projects that are implemented, and that you need our leaders to actually speak to the people, not speak over them, but speak to the people, empathize with them, and try to understand the deep-seated issue that afflicts each part of this country. So we need to bring everybody inside the tent.
All right, so bringing everyone to the conversation, thank you very much for pointing out some of the critical issues that you believe ought to be focused on if we must move forward as a nation. Elite consensus, you talked about philosophical, we must have a joint philosophy, we must have shared vision. You've spoken to corruption, signs of government, very important points. However, you didn't speak to, and I'd like you to touch on security. I touch on that because we can have all these things you've mentioned. However, if the people do not feel safe or secure, then we wouldn't be speaking about a number of things. In a recent study, it showed that many Nigerians for second priority for them in terms of what the next leader should focus on is security of lives and properties. And obviously, because if people don't have safety in where, of lives and property, it goes on to affect the economy, food production, as well as other things. What should the next leader who is elected in 2023 be doing to finally get it right with regards to our security apparatus to deal with terrorism, to deal with kidnapping, banditry, and the likes?
So this is a very important question. And it does seem to me that, again, we need to be careful here to try to understand the set of issues that has actually given rise to insecurity. I think at the root of it is a major economic and social meltdown, informed mainly by two factors. One is grinding poverty. Second is the population explosion that has created a huge youth bulge. Three, social conditions in terms of erosion of values, where people's heads have been turned upside down, informed by lack of employment, drug addiction, people simply being idle. And the fact of the matter is that an idle mind, they say, is a devil's workshop. So unless you are able to deal with these root causes, I dare say that in the medium and long term, you actually cannot deal with the issue of insecurity. It will rear its head again. What do you need to do? The first thing that we need to do is to have a community of stakeholders. And I've said this over and over again. Community of stakeholders, all of whom, in one way or the other, are actually involved in solving the problem. Right from the communities in the rural areas to the cities, comprising government officers, traditional rulers, the media, academia, labor, community leaders, national security people, both retired and serving, to get them into a room to actually try to understand the depth and breadth of this issue and come to terms with it. In the short term, we do know that we are severely under-policed in this country. And it does seem to me that you need to ramp up those numbers considerably, train them and equip them. Second, as far as the military goes, the numbers also need to go up. They need to be equipped. We need to invest heavily in intelligence as well. The third thing that needs to be done is to motivate them by making sure that they get paid properly for the services that they offer. And beyond that, I think it is important to also invest heavily in changing the minds of people. So there are three things that need to be done, in my view, in one of these buckets. One is the need for us to calibrate very carefully a very robust policy similar to what had happened in the Niger Delta to actually disarm, demobilize, and reintegrate people into society. And then find exit routes for them so that they can find other vocations in their daily lives. And then the third thing that needs to be done in the medium and long term, in my view, is that nothing success like success. If only we can bake a bigger cake in which we all have a bigger share, and the promise of an even bigger share for our children and our grandchildren, many of these symptoms of insecurity are going to abate. And then finally, it is important that we have a very strong law and order environment in which people who do wrong things are actually brought to book in an open and transparent manner.
Okay, I mean, I was excited when you talked about our stock as regards, infrastructure stock to GDP, which is abysmally at, I think, 35 or 40% threshold now.
35.
35% threshold. And that is abysmal when you look at it deeply. But also, in that our stock, one part we don't look at too much is the debt capital. When I was talking to somebody in the debt management office, I was talking about the possibility of the debt capital in this country going, if utilized and, revamped, going up to about 50 trillion naira, which is a sizable quota when you try to juxtapose that with our GDP numbers. 50 trillion. We're sitting on debt capital that is not being used. I mean, can you talk me through how we can use debt capital as one of the panaceas to rejig this alien economy? And I'll give you a quick instance. Look at the Federal Secretariat, just behind us here in Ikoyi. Has been abandoned. Only God knows what is going on. Debt capital.
Yes.
And you've got a lot of them like that.
Yeah. So, I think you are touching on a much larger problem here. And thank you for that. It seems to me that, again, returning to the broad theme of macroeconomic policy, like I had said earlier, macroeconomic policy is actually driven by fiscal policy and monetary policy. Fiscal policy is revenues, expenditures, investments, and tax. And monetary policy is all about money supply and then using a number of tools in order to influence either the expansion or the contraction of money. Both sets of tools are required for purposes of expanding economic growth. And Nigeria is currently facing a monetary crisis and a fiscal crisis. How do you actually get out of it? And I will answer, you touched on one thing, but I think there are more issues. In other words, essentially your question is touching on how do we restructure, sterilize this balance sheet of the country and give it arms and legs to start running again. I think that's the fundamental crux of the question. Number one, on the revenue side, Rufai, you are aware that almost 800,000 to 900,000 barrels of oil are stolen every day. Except in some kind of magical kingdom, I do not know of any functioning state anywhere around the world with all the institutions of government duly entrenched that would allow this amount of oil to be stolen, not occasionally, but on a daily basis. It's like the four of us being robbed of our salaries. Every single day, armed robbers come into our house to take our daily wage away from us. Second, I think, is the need to expand our acreage. We are sitting on a lot of oil and gas reserves in this country. With very good management and skills, you can actually expand that acreage. Number three, a lot of countries in Europe, because of the war in Ukraine, are actually looking to buy gas. And something, Germany has just signed a deal with Qatar, if you recall, which will represent about 2.7% of its needs. If Nigeria can organize its institution and organize itself, we can become a ready market for that kind of, so we can generate liquidity. Three is privatization, like you rightly pointed out. There are a number of assets that are yet to be either privatized, commercialized, or concessioned. And mind you, you can also liberalize the economy by getting into some big ticket transactions in certain sectors of the economy. And therefore, carry out an auction, just like the GSM auctions, bring a lot of money in hard currency into the treasury. Stranded assets, like you pointed out.
Yeah.
Very, very important. Well, and so on and so forth.
Okay, I wanted to take you back to those fundamental issues that you talked about earlier on: philosophy, infrastructure, elite consensus. But I was trying to listen very carefully to see, even when you were talking about security, whether you consider education as one of those big problems that you identified, or to to use your phrase, big ticket issues that we should consider going forward. And then the issue of women representation. Recently, a group of civil society organizations had they presented what they call the manifesto agenda. At another event, one of these UN representatives in Nigeria was saying that Nigeria is almost at a zero level in terms of women representation, 4% representation in parliament. Whereas in Senegal, they have over 60%. In Rwanda, they have 57%. So do you consider education and affirmative action, women representation, part of those big ticket issues that we need to worry about?
So I would say that education, or what I call human development, is actually at the epicenter of economic and social progress for each country, for any country. First and foremost, the nature, phase, and character of education has changed over the last 30 to 40 years. What makes a person or a country successful is not your brawn and your muscle, but what is in your own head. And today we are living in a world that is based on a knowledge economy. And therefore getting people educated right from kindergarten through polytechnics and universities is crucial, extremely crucial. Nigeria will never be able to compete in this globe of ours without having its citizens educated. An educated person is an enlightened person. And therefore, when people are enlightened, they're able to not only get jobs, but they're able to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong, what is decent and what is indecent. It also keeps them away from trouble. So education is central to our development strategy. I do agree with you. Talking about women, I will actually combine that with youth. Many of us have actually attained a certain stage in our life that our productivity is going to be declining sharply. You have a bunch of young men and women in their 20s, many with diplomas and degrees, unable to find jobs. These are very energetic, very dynamic, very imaginative. And if we do not take care in this country, we will end up sending them into their old age without making meaningful contributions to productivity and innovation in this country. I couldn't agree with you more that we need to lay a lot of emphasis on the youth development, and also women development. This nation has come a very long way. The world has come a very long way. The world is running away from us. The issue of gender is so critical that in every progressive society is actually receiving a great deal of attention. So we need to recalibrate these ratios and give women the rightful place in our society that they deserve. So that would be my answer to those questions.
All right, thank you very much for responding. Now, just going again to some of those items you mentioned, and the reason why it's important for us to critically analyze it is because you've mentioned some very key factors. You talk about national unity and the fact that the nation is wounded. There are people who are grieved, there's a sense of injustice, people don't feel like they're fairly represented, or there's equity and justice. Yeah. What would be your recommendation? Now, we've had, looking at the current election cycle, it's the road to 2023, and of course, these are some of the things we're discussing around that. People are upset that there isn't full representation in some of the candidates, whether by tribe or by religion, in terms of being well represented across board. Some people have spoken about the importance of federal character zoning. It's the time of this particular region, it's the time of that particular region. Do you think situations like this eat deeper into the feeling and the sense of disunity or not being well represented, as you mentioned, as one of the critical issues that must be decided on?
So I think this is an issue that has been overflogged since last year, I would say. It tends to pop up all the time. My own views about this matter are very clear, crystal clear. I think the kind of attitudes that we see today unfolding are shaped by distrust and mutual suspicion. But more importantly, because people who have been elected into office, including bureaucrats, I dare say, are not delivering the goods. As a consequence, people feel alienated, and therefore they recede into their regional or tribal cocoons. My own view is that if you are going to have a news anchor for Arise News, you should get the very best, the brightest, the smartest, who understands this business inside out, and who is fair, equitable, and just in all of his dealings with his various stakeholders. It should be no different for a Senate person, a governor, or a president, in my view. And once I think we're able to bake a bigger cake, develop this economy in order to deal with grinding poverty, generate prosperity, raise living standards, it doesn't matter to me who actually is leading the country.
So competence above these other issues. Now, how then do you think we can best promote national unity so that everyone feels included and not left behind?
So as far as I'm concerned, the governor or the president is father of all. It doesn't matter what his color is, whether it's blue, white, or green. It does not really matter where he comes from. He raises his right hand and takes an oath of office to do well to all manner of people, to defend and protect the tenets of the Constitution. And he is able to he's able to deal with his duties in a way that is effective, in a way in which he pulls everyone inside the tent, that everybody gets to have a fair shot when people are being hired. It doesn't matter where they actually come from. And I personally believe that from every nook and cranny of this country, you are able to get very bright and serious people who can actually deliver the goods. And it is also very, very important, working off their campaign blueprint. It's important to actually pay attention to resource allocation to all regions of the country based on the very distinct needs of each of these regions. These, I believe, are actually more fundamental than getting worried about who is running this country.
Okay. A lot of people argue with you, sir, that it's easy to say in an ideal sense. You know, like the economists would say, Saturday's being paribus, but it's not always paribus. We've had a very divided system, which a lot of people feel that is the reason for all of these challenges. And you talked about the leader being the father of all. We've had many leaders that have indeed not been the father of all, that have been the father of few. And that's a problem, that has been the problem in Nigeria with their decisions and all of that. And that cascades back to the conversation about your party, the PDP, and Governor Wike being disgruntled. A lot of people say, for us to be able to talk about idealism, that it should be based on competence, every part must be able to have their bite of the cherry. But that didn't happen in the case of Atiku Abubakar. And now, a lot of people are saying, after the emergence of Atiku Abubakar in the last election cycle, he should have probably come to South in the spirit of zoning so that everybody has a bite of the cherry. And that's the grouse of Governor Wike. And that's the reason why your party is divided and we have the G5 governors as we speak today. What do you say about that?
The fact of the matter is that these issues are settled as far as I'm concerned because the rules were clearly defined. People went in, and it was agreed through the various organs of the party that it was going to be open. Governor Wike and others agreed to actually contest on the basis of that open primary, open to all parts of the country. And the result is what it is. And that night, if you were there, or if you cared to watch on television, it was quite an open, fair and transparent process as far as the elections go. Having come out of it, I would say the following. Number one, that, like I said to another network, I do have tremendous amount of respect for Governor Wike. He's a bright guy. He knows how to whip a crowd. He has abundant energy. He knows how to put forth issues. And it does seem to me that there is a need for a rapprochement between him and the chairman of the party. The chairman himself is somebody who is an intellectual of repute. He has certain deep-seated values. Both of them are committed to the progress of this country. Both of them, I believe, are committed to the progress of their party. Both of them are interested in getting, winning this election at all levels. What I think ought to happen is for the two of them to actually go into a room and sort out their differences. In order to do that, number one, there must be good faith negotiation. Number two, all the issues need to be put on the table. Number three, you and I, if we go into a room, I do not expect that you would allow me to die while you live. So it's live and let live. So they should agree, first of all, they should agree on all those things that are common to them. Where there are differences, they should then find ways and means of actually working out those differences, in my view. That would be my answer.
Okay. Let me go back again to one of those fundamental issues that you identified, elite consensus. How do you build elite consensus in a country that you also say is troubled, is divided? And what type of consensus? There seems to be an established consensus here that the elite class in Nigeria is prebendal. It's a thieving, rent-collecting, prebendal, elite. They're just there to collect rent and steal money. That's why, when they meet, they greet each other, they attend each other's parties because they really don't care about us anyway. So there can be a consensus for evil. There can be a consensus for good. So how do you transform this thieving elite that has already established a consensus that Nigeria is a honeypot for them to serve their own selfish interests? How do you move them from that end of the spectrum to another end of the spectrum, considering that this elite is even perpetually self-producing, reproducing?
Okay, so I think that is a valid question. It worries me to no end myself. Number one, when people are overwhelmed by problems, they lose hope. And that hopelessness feeds into a negative spiral, feeding spiral. So I'm not surprised that you actually are taking that particular view at this point in time. But we mustn't forget that at one time, Nigeria was not always like this. At one time, Nigeria worked well. It was governed relatively well. And the kind of elite concerns that we talked about existed. The third point I need to make is that what you are describing is the status quo in terms of what exists today. People are entitled to having their own dreams about the future. And the kind of issues are outlined. I'm saying that Nigeria will be exactly in that terrible spot that you described. unless we actually onboard some of these attributes that I described at the top of the interview. So essentially, what I'm saying is that these are necessary and desirable conditions for us to be able to forge a very strong and robust democratic culture on the basis of which we can actually bring about a sustained long-term economic and social development in this country. That's really what I was referring to. And talking about elite consensus, leadership, like Chinua Achebe has said, Nigeria's problem is that of leadership. I think this is a saying for the ages. Unless we are able to get a leader and a set of leaders, concentric circle of leaders at all levels, who are selfless, who are visionary, who have empathy for the common man on the street, and who have the knowledge and the skills to take Nigeria from where it is today to where it should be tomorrow, we wouldn't get there. And therefore, it is my own well-informed view that if we do get a leader who has these kind of qualities, he can then affect the polity by getting similar types of leaders who will be serving along with him in order to bring about this state of affairs. And let me say also, Ruben, finally, that this country has run out of oxygen. I do not see what other alternative we have other than dismembering the country if we do not return to these same old virtues of good governance.
All right, so you talk about leadership, and I think that's quite critical, that we have a leadership problem in Nigeria. Now, some of the criticisms of some of the candidates who've come forward for election is that we're recycling the same leaders whom we have pointed that we have issues with them. They haven't been able, they've come under allegations of corruption, of the elite, even as Dr. Abati mentioned, and a number of things, not being able to handle security, power effectively in the nation, corruption levels at an all-time high, and so many other things, the issue of education. Do you think that Nigerians should begin, or what is the model leader for Nigeria? And do you think that for someone who's been a part of the leadership and hasn't been able to effect the much desired change, should the person still be vying for re-election? What new thing has the person got to offer? And then I know you're also big on the leaders, especially for the highest office in the land, having some form of economic background in terms of being able to assess the economy and direct or lead economically. Do you think any of these candidates have what it takes in that instance?
So that's a lot of questions in one.
Just two.
Let me just say that what the nation actually requires at this point in time is that we need a bunch of leaders who have a very sharp and acute understanding of the condition of the country today. You make a reference to the fact that it's the same sort of people who are being recycled. Please take a look at the current campaign going on. I have deciphered 2 or 3 issues. One is that for the first time in the history of this country, people are wholly dissatisfied with the status quo. And a lot of these are being ventilated all over this country. Second is the notion that we're beginning to see youth in this country vigorously demanding for better accountability, more transparency, and to begin to hold their leaders accountable. And that is actually what has given rise to a number of 1 or 2 or 3 parties that are actually asking very big questions about the state of the country today. And politicians may want to be in denial, but inside their closed rooms, they're paying very serious attention to this. And democracy is work in progress, about 22 years. I think the shape, form, and character of leadership, given these kind of questions that are being asked today, is going to change over a period of time. these things may not likely happen overnight. The character of Nigeria is fairly different as it is today from that of either the Arab countries or its Eastern European countries, where you have an Arab Spring or an Orange Spring, so to speak. So it does seem to me that these things are changing, and they will change for the better. The final note on this issue is the fact that we would like to see more and more people engage deeply in the political process, either in terms of vying for political offices or in terms of exercising their civic duties, to actually demand better governance, demand change. And by the time you collectivize all of these issues, I think you will see Nigeria moving in the right direction. I would say even from the next election cycle.
But poverty, weaponized poverty, is still a big factor. And these same politicians that they come every cycle are the ones that have weaponized poverty. But you also talked about homogeneity of society. You talked about the Arab Spring. By extension, maybe let's even talk about the fruit seller, Mohammed Bouazizi, that started the Arab Spring when he set himself alight. But Nigeria had that too. For the very first time, that was a perceived culture of not pushing back change when we had the NSAS. But the states crushed it. So, what would you say about a state that suppresses its people when they want to talk? And also the weaponization of poverty that makes it easy for this fleeting journeyman called politician to constantly steal the apparatus of states and capture the state from us.
So history has shown over hundreds, if not thousands of years, that no matter how powerful a government is, when the fundamental time for change comes, they cannot stop it. I think if you have people who are large enough in numbers, spread all over the country, all interconnected, all having the same set of goals and shared values, there are no amount of tanks and guns that can actually stop change, which is exactly what happened. In the Arab world, many of these dictatorships at the time had far more weapons than Nigeria could actually even think of. So I wouldn't like to see that kind of violent change, through bloodshed. I would like to see this happen through a democratic process. We have 260 million Nigerians, out of whom at least 100 can actually get deeply embedded in the political process to bring about change, and that includes you and I. That was my major motivation for going into politics.
So this weaponization of poverty that still make people vote certain ways that, can be anti the progress orientation of the country. Because that's the only tool they still use. That even when we talk at least consensus, we talk all the economic data, the people in the hinterland that have not seen 5,000 naira, once they give them 5,000 naira for one day, they'll do otherwise.
I believe that all of that will change over a period of time. If I've been a candidate or an aspirant, I've gone around the country and I have seen the reaction of people. Unlike other seasons, this particular season, I think people are genuinely worried. You still have a larger number of people who are willing to sell their vote for a miserable price. But I think from the trajectory that I see, all of that will change.
Okay, as we begin to wrap up, because now we have to bring this to an end. You talked about grand vision. What is that grand vision for Nigeria? Where do you see Nigeria within the global space? The Minister of Finance was just saying yesterday that Nigeria is not broke and that our debt to GDP ratio at maybe about, is it 23%, she said, or 30-something percent is sustainable. What is that grand vision? where should Nigeria be?
So, Nigeria, I think, first of all, where is the world and where is it headed? The world is actually changing in a very profound way in several respects. One is that because of digitization of the global economy, there's a technological revolution that is going on right now, anchored on a lot of innovation, artificial intelligence. The entire global transportation sector is undergoing deep-seated change in a way in which the cars that you and I drive today will become completely worthless and useless, probably in 20 years' time. Number two, the pandemic has changed lives profoundly and is actually accelerating the pace of digital transformation as well. There are many other aspects like climate change that is changing and reordering our world. So whilst we are actually focused here on everyday issues to do with our survival, either in terms of power or food or good roads or banditry, other nations are moving forward. So where should Nigeria be? I would like to see Nigeria do 4 things. First of all, you need to take Nigeria into an emergency room in order to apply a band-aid to stop the bleeding. All of those things I mentioned on the revenue and expenditure side, they are fairly easy. With a very serious and committed government, you can actually restore our balance sheet to more saner levels and also generate liquidity in order to begin to fund critical aspects of development. Having done that, then you need a period of recuperation where you actually go through a period of rehabilitation and development. And the third phase is then to go to launch into a new era of tremendous growth and prosperity. And the fourth phase is then to become a global player by taking your place within the globe to perhaps become the number 10 or number 15th most globally competitive economy that is able to generate sustained prosperity and a high quality of living for its people. All of these I see taking place within the next 15 years.
Well, on that note, we'd like to thank you very much for joining us on the morning show. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed Hayatu-Deen, PDP chieftain and also chairman, Renaissance Development. Thank you for an insightful conversation.